Complex numbers show up on about half of tests, maybe a little bit more. It's a good question type to pick up a point on because there's only a couple things to remember. That said, you kind of need to practice it a little bit if you're not very comfortable with it, because there are 2 or 3 ways they can ask these questions that can really throw you off, even though they all boil down to the same concept or 2 concepts. So spend a little time with the practice problems on this one. Okay, so what is a complex number? A complex number is A, some integer, plus B, some coefficient, plus I, or times I, excuse me. I is the square, I is always I. And I is always equal to the square root of -1. They usually will tell you that. Or they'll tell you that I squared is equal to -1. But they usually say one or the other in the question itself. That's sort of perfunctory, polite information to give you. Why do we have I? Well, we can't have a real number square root of a negative. There's no way that we can multiply 2 identical numbers together and have a negative result. Positive times positive is positive. Negative times negative is negative. Or excuse me, is positive, sorry. So, for example, square root of -1, well, let's just say I'm trying to multiply 2 numbers together to get to -1. Well, -1 and -1 seem like the likely candidates, but -1 times -1 is +1. +1 times +1 is +1. All positive numbers have 2 square roots. You could say the square roots of 4 are both 2 and -2. 2 and -2. So I allows us to get square roots of negative numbers. You're probably most familiar with I from Algebra 2 when you did the quadratic formula. The ACT hardly ever asks a quadratic formula question, so I don't really bother to cover it. And you know, I'm very thorough, so hardly ever means I've seen like 1 in 5, 7 years worth of tests. So not too worried about it. It's great if you know it though. Here's the rule of thumb with I, and this is the big concept for you to remember. Treat I like a variable, except when it's to a power greater than 1 or other than 1. It could be -4, would be the same thing. When I is squared, it becomes -1. So I is just equal to I. I squared is equal to -1. I cubed is equal to -1 times I, and so on and so forth. Once I is to a power greater than 1, you have to start factoring out these -1s. If it's to an even power, you can remove all the I from that term at least. All the I's from that term. Let's look at the problem down at the bottom of your screen. If I squared plus I to the x is equal to 0, what could be a value for x? Well, first, let's follow the rule, right? Let's go ahead and make this into a -1. So now we have I squared, -1 plus I to the x is equal to 0. So let's go ahead and move our -1. So we have I to the x is equal to 1. You can test answers here and kind of figure out, well, it can't be any of the odd ones. A is I, right? So that's not going to work. B would be -1. -1's not equal to 1. C would be -1I. That's definitely not equal to -1. D, on the other hand, well, that's equal to I squared times I squared. Or you could say -1 times -1. So I to the 4th is equal to 1 because it's -1 times -1. You'll never ever get a value out of an I to a power that's not 1 or -1 or -I or just I. Those are the 4 options you can have. I to any power will be one of these 4 things. 1, -1, I, or -I. It has to be one of those 4 things. Don't let them try to get you with a 2 or a 3. I've seen them do that before. Now, that pretty much covers the basic idea for the ACT. There are several different kinds of practice problems in here for you to work. They're all built around this concept, more or less. Treat I like a variable, except when it's to a power greater than 1. If you're just focused on the ACT, you can turn it off here. But I do want to talk about an SAT problem I'm seeing a lot on really every SAT test that they're releasing. And I've seen problems somewhat similar to it on the ACT that are not as involved. And it's the complex number in a fraction. So let's say I have something like this. I have 3 over 1 minus I. And they'll ask you what's it equivalent to. Now, what the question is really based on or predicated upon, or what the driving force behind the question is if you remember from fractions, and review this if you need to, you can't leave irrational numbers in the denominator of a fraction. I can't have square roots that are unresolvable, like I couldn't have the square root of 2, square root of 3, 5, whatever. And I can't have I in the bottom of a fraction. I just can't. This is a binomial. Remember, I'm going to treat I like a fraction. Excuse me, I'm going to treat I like a variable. And so I need to get rid of I. So just like anything else, when I'm trying to change the format of a fraction, but not its value, I'm not trying to change the ratio, the relationship between the top and the bottom, I need to multiply by the same thing on the top and the bottom. But I have to be careful because this is going to be a binomial, right? So if I just multiply by I, well, this will be I squared. Great, I've gotten rid of this I. But now I'm going to distribute an I here, and I've just shifted the I from here to here. So I have to multiply this binomial with something that will allow the middle term to cancel. And if you're thinking difference of squares, you're right on. This is difference of squares is also covered in the intermediate factoring video. Now I can multiply these together without leaving an I. Let's see how it works. So let's do the top first, just to get it out of the way so I don't have to think about it. 3 times 1 plus I. The bottom is 1 minus I times 1 plus I. Okay, and then that's going to basically turn into 3I plus I. I don't need a parentheses anymore. Over 1 minus I, 1 plus I. So FOIL, I'm going to get 1 times 1 is 1. O, outer, 1 times positive I is plus I. Negative I times 1 is negative I. Negative I times I is negative I squared. See, these middle i's will cancel, just like they should in the difference of squares. There's no middle term. And I'll have 1 minus I squared, which will be 1 minus negative 1, 1 plus 1. And I'll be left with, in my denominator, 2. And I've successfully gotten rid of the I in my denominator. I don't care if it's in the numerator. It's going to end up somewhere, really. I don't care if it's in the numerator. I just can't have it in the denominator. You may see this on the ACT. I've never seen one where you really had to figure it out all the way. I've seen one where they lead you down there and they kind of set it up for you and you have to figure out how to FOIL it. But it does show up on every one of these new SATs that I've seen so far. So if you're taking both tests, it's worth knowing.